How come everybody has a sheet today? Oh, because I was thinking of learning something else. I just printed out another tool. We'll get to it. I just thought it was appropriate for a couple of days to learn about Hanukkah, or Tzaddik and Hanukkah.
Okay.
A little bit of a switch.
Which sefer?
In Pri Tzaddik, Hanukkah is. If you have the sefer, it's in Parshas Miketz. Vayeshev, the end of Vayeshev. Let me just give a little bit of introduction, just so we understand where we're going. This whole idea of the ness of Hanukkah, the ness of the menorahs of Hanukkah. The candles were not supposed to burn according to nature, and they burnt anyway. An unnatural lighting of the candles. Miraculous, a miraculous flame. So the concept of a miraculous flame started much earlier. The first instance of miraculous flame is the sneh. So the sneh, inenu ukal. Moshe Rabbeinu came across, so we're in Shmos, we're way back in Shmos. Moshe Rabbeinu came across a sneh she'inenu ukal. He could have just had a prophecy. He could have just had a prophecy like all of the other Nevi'im. But somehow we needed this prop here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put forth this idea of a burning bush, and it wasn't just a bush that was burning. That in itself wouldn't have been any kind of a special phenomenon, but what was special about it was hasnei nenu ukal, that it didn't go out. So I want to explain this, and I think it's very important. Flames go out. The reason why flames go out is because there's a fuel, and the fuel is that which is giving power to the fire. It means, on a deeper level, it means that fire, presumably, you can cook with fire, you can warm yourself with fire, but it's always on the cheshbon of the destruction and the losing of something else. You want to drive your car, that's a very convenient thing to do, but you're using up oil and changing world politics every time you step on the gas. Changing the balance of power. You want to cook, it's fine, but the gas is going and you're going to run out of gas. So fire requires a fuel, or the constructive aspect of fire, certainly the destructive aspect, but even the constructive aspect of fire only comes through destruction. That's what fuel is. So that's the way the world goes. That's the way Olam Haza is. Olam Haza, very often, one has to give up in order to get. In Shemayim, it doesn't work that way. In Shemayim, there's a Tov Gomor. There's absolute good. Absolute good means that it's good. You're giving up something, one thing to get something else, but it's Tov Mitzaratzma. There is such an idea of Tov coming from Shemayim. So therefore, it's possible that although an Eish Ba'aretz, you see something burning where there's smoke, there's fire. The smoke is the fuel. Is the fuel being broken down to its finest particles and being put into the air. That's what smoke is. Even a vapor has particle to it. Just it's microscopic. It doesn't last. So where there's smoke, there's fire. But that's only talking about where the fire is a man-made fire, or a fire which is part of this world. But a fire that came from Shemayim probably doesn't have any smoke, because nothing is being used to create that fire, and it's absolute tov. So Moshe Rabbeinu would not have been stopped by a burning bush. That's not anything spectacular. But what stopped him in his tracks was that Asnei Nenu Ukal, that this is not a fire like every other fire. This is a fire. This has to be a fire of Hashem, because it's burning and that's not being consumed. This can only happen from Shemayim, where you have absolute good with no downside to it. That's the burning bush.
In terms of the Mizbeach and the fire of the Mizbeach?
So, yes.
And Aaron's sons?
Oh.
Right.
Sorry.
Along that line, we have the smoke because of the incomplete combustion. You have particles of carbon, whatever. If something's coming from Shemayim, it's going to be perfect. So there's not going to be anything that's left over.
My point exactly. So we don't. The rule of where there's fire, there's smoke doesn't apply by a nation in Hashemayim. That's exactly my point. I tell you, I always like to tell the story that I was in the airport in Colombia, Barranquilla, Colombia. So I wasn't smuggling drugs. I was going to speak, believe it or not, for a Kehillah in Barranquilla, Colombia. Said it was a frightening experience a little bit, because I called the American Embassy before I went, and I said, should I, I was invited to Barranquilla, Colombia, should I go? And they said, no. Don't go.
You went anyway.
Right, it's kidnapping, and what do you do? The rabbis get kidnapped. I don't know if any rabbi ever got kidnapped. You're high profile, and they'll do it. And, so I said, I think I'm going to go anyway. And they said, okay, whatever you do. So just keep your passport very, very close to you. Don't give your passport to anyone. That was the advice they gave me. So it was an interesting thing. I got off the plane. I didn't even get through the meches and all of that stuff, I just got off the plane, and this man comes over to me and he says, passport? So I said, sure. I took it out, he grabs it and he walks away. It's his. So I said, okay, it just happened. It just happened. I'm being kidnapped. Here it is. The next thing I knew, I was outside. I don't even know what happened. I didn't go through any official channels, passport control. I was outside. And there's a guy with a big black card. He's holding the door for me. And he says, please go in. So I'm looking a little bit suspicious. And he says, don't worry. He says, the car is bulletproof. This, of course, made me feel very comfortable. Real story. So I said, who are you? So he said, I'm the Rosh HaKahal. I'm the president of the shul. And they came to pick me up. So he got me through. He took my passport and he got me through everything. But the reason I'm telling you the story is that when I was getting off the plane, there was one other Jew that I could tell that look, a European Jewish guy. So I said to him, why are you going to Barranquilla, Colombia? So he told me that he's going to Barranquilla, Colombia because his father is buried there, and he goes every year on the yard site to his father's kever. I don't know exactly why his father's there. Not only that, but his children come and his grandchildren come. They all come to Colombia to honor the grandfather. So I said, that's a very beautiful thing, because it's a little bit dangerous. So he said, it's a very important thing, he told me. This always stuck in my mind. He said, because you see he says, did you ever think, I'm going to mention this before, he says, did you ever think that in Yiddish, he was talking to me in Yiddish, he said, did you ever think in Yiddish there's the word for a son is what? How do you say son? So son, zun. Son, zun. Daughter is Tochter, a sister, Schwester, it all sounds right to German. And so he says a grandson is an einikel. It's connection grandson, einikel. So he says einikel is a fast way of saying hasneh, einenu ukal. It doesn't go out. The torch doesn't go out. The fire doesn't go out. So einenu ukal. I don't know if it's true or not. It's a nice word. I don't know the etymology of the Yiddish word einikel, but it's so interesting. In other words, to him, like the grandchildren is a sign that the fire doesn't snag nenu ukal. Say nenu ukal. You say it 5 times fast, and you get to an einikel. Get to an einikel. Okay, so that's what he told me. His grandchildren are coming, but it's the same idea that if something is completely spiritual, it doesn't fizzle out. It doesn't use fuel. It's not at the cheshbon of something else. It just keeps on going. So therefore, you have a situation of a burning bush. So this became, if you trace the history of the Shekhinah, that the Shekhinah represents itself and manifests itself in this world in the form of a fire. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu learned. So then it carries on to the Eish HaMizbeach, as Eliezer says. So before the Eish HaMizbeach even, there was the Har Sinai. Har Sinai had a fire. It wasn't a fire that consumed anything. It wasn't a fire that was burning anything. It was a fire on a mountain. Right? It was a fire on a mountain. So that was also the Hashras HaShechina. The Hashras HaShechina was manifested by an Eish Chanukah. Klal Yisrael were afraid of this fire, but this fire was not consuming anything. It wasn't an Eish Oichla. They were afraid of that, but it was a fire that was not consuming. And then on the Mizbeach, the fire continued, and there was Eish Tamid. There was a fire that was miraculously lit, and also the Ner Maravi of the Menorah. So the Torah says, and the Gemara explains, that by the Shalosh Regalim they would expose this Ner Maravi. Eidusu L'Bnei Yisrael, that this was a testimony. This was a testimony for the Jewish people. They would open the curtain. This was a testimony for the Jewish people that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us. This was a chizuk for the people that were Oil Regel. So what was the chizuk of seeing the candle? The chizuk was there was a miracle in the candle, but it wasn't just a miracle. There could have been many miracles in the base of Mikdash, 10 miracles in the base of Mikdash. It was a sign that Hasna Einenu Ukal. This was a simon of the Shekhinah. In other words, it was the burning bush coming in different forms over and over again in history, where there's an Eish Min HaShamayim. There's a fire which does not consume anything, and it just burns. And this was a miracle, a necessary miracle, to show that the Shekhinah Shari B'neinu is the Lashon of the Gemara.
I had a Rav who had a stone, a rock from Har Sinai. And he said he brought it to Shul on Shabbos yet, to show us the stone. He
had the burning bush on it.
Burning bush. He said every stone.
I have the same stone.
You have the stone.
Not his.
His, no.
It's a big mountain. I have a copy of that stone.
Yeah.
Picture of the burning bush?
It has, the stone is so interesting. There is a mountain where supposedly Har Sinai was. Nobody knows clearly which one is Har Sinai, but if you cut a rock out of this mountain, stone out of the mountain, no matter how you cut it, cut it this way, cut it that way, you see imprints of very, very clear. It's not of a green, literally a green bush.
Yeah.
Goes all the way through the mountain.
It's amazing.
I have one. I can bring it to class. My show and tell. But so the kesher you're bringing out, as he's bringing out the kesher between the burning bush and Har Sinai, and then to the Mizbeach, where again. So what was the simon? That was a simon of the Shekhinah that came through an Eish Eda Ukal that never went out. And the reason this was a simon is to show that there is such a thing for the Jewish people as absolute good. There is such a thing as absolute tov, not tov on the cheshbon of Ra, but that was the presence of Hashem, that there is some tov in this world. There's some absolute tov, and that's called the Shekhinah. Something could be just good. Torah is absolute tov, and that's why there was a fire in Har Sinai, the Menorah. So when the Yevonim came, and with all the wars that were going on there, they extinguished the Menorah, and not only did they extinguish the Menorah, but they were metame as hashmonim, because in order to make a fire which is going to bring out the Shekhinah the way it did, it has to be shemen tahar. So they were metame as hashemen. So once they were metame as hashemen, that siman, that oshi l'bnei Yisrael shashchina shari b'neim was gone. So the real problem with the Timos Kol Hashmonim is that we no longer had this sign from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Hashem is with us. We didn't have a siman from Shemayim of an eternal light, an er tamid, a light which doesn't go out, a light which doesn't require fuel. They can put fuel, but the fuel is not tar. It's not the fuel of the Shekhinah. It's just going to burn out. Nothing's going to happen. So when they found the Pach Shemen of the Kohen Gadol, and they lit it, so if they lit the Shemen Tahar, which is all they could do, but it's not going to necessarily light for long enough until they can bring oil from the Golan or wherever it is that they brought the oil from. The Gemara tells us where they brought oil from. So, as everybody knows, there was a Ness Hanukkah that the lights burnt anyway. So, what was the omek of the Ness? What was that the Shechina Shara B'Yisrael? In other words, what you had in the Hanukkah story was a repetition of the burning bush, repetition of Har Sinai, the repetition of the Mizbeach, the repetition of the Menorah of the Beis HaMikdash. They had a repetition of the fact that, look at this, the fire is not going out. So the Hashmonaim and Klal Yisrael stood mul ha-menorah. They saw the same thing that Moshe Rabbeinu saw at the sneh. So that's the Hanukkah story. New version of the Hanukkah story. The fire that doesn't go out. It didn't go out for 200 years. For 200 years until the Romans destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. We know that it was a big Liku Neiros B'Chatzos Kachecha was a beautiful simon that beyond the Hanukkah story. The Hanukkah story was that we won wars unnaturally. In the whole Al Anissim, it doesn't even mention the miracle of the Hanukkah story. The Mishnah doesn't mention the miracle of the Neiros of the Hanukkah story. Just the Gemara says, it's a Gemara, Aleza Das Kavua, it was the Ness of the Neiros. Why do we make a Yontiv out of this? Not because we won wars miraculously. The Yontiv of Hanukkah is a Yontiv which is celebrating the Hachazaras HaShechina to Klal Yisrael and the Beis HaMikdash because of the Hashmonaim went for another couple hundred years. It means the Beis HaMikdash was with us. Golus that came about by the Churban Beis HaMikdash was Golus, not just our Golus that we went out to, we had to go out all over the world into Golus, but there was the Golus HaShechina. So the Golus HaShechina means the Shechina left us, the Shechina left Klal Yisrael, the Shechina left the Beis HaMikdash, and the Neiros went out.
Why was the Eish on the Mizbeach that combusted? There was smoke. There was Amud.
It was really well, it's an unclear piece of Torah over there. Afal pi shaner doilek mitzvah la'isiv mishalai. Right. So that's going on the Ner Mizbeach and on the Ner Maravi.
Yeah, but they used wood. And there was smoke.
But it wouldn't have gone out, says the Gemara. It would not have gone out. So the Ner Maravi didn't go out. The Ner Maravi didn't go out. There was a Ness. It says the Ner should...
Sometimes it did, though. As the Mishnah says, that the Kohen would come in, he'd find stuff. If he would find a dog, if he wouldn't find a dog, then he would...
When?
In the morning.
Which period was that in that the Mishnah was talking about? The simple pshat is that was one of the Nissim. One of the Nissim is that it didn't go out, the Ner Maravi. I mean, you're right. I mean, but that was one of the Nissim. Okay, so let's learn a little bit inside here. Inyan Chanukah nistar b'gemara b'perek b'mem adlikin. We find the Hanukkah story in the perek b'mem adlikin of Masechta Shabbos. Be'inyan and the Hanukkah Neiros show up Be'inyan Hadlakas Ner Shabbos. In the middle of the halachas, B'mem Adlikin is Hilchos Ner Shabbos. So in the middle of Ner Shabbos, the Gemara says, could you light with this kind of oil? Could you light with that kind of oil? Then gets us into Ner Hanukkah. What about the oil of Hanukkah? Loi b'makom shehusker b'mishnah. The Gemara could have been, says Reb Tzadok, brought in Baba Kama Samach Beis, because in Baba Kama Samach Beis, there at least there's a Mishnah which refers to Hanukkah, and there it talks about if somebody's driving by with a donkey full of hay, and the hay ignites because of the Hanukkah candles inside the store. At least there's some discussion about Hanukkah in the Tanoim, in the Mishnah. Usually Gemaras follow Mishnahs. But it's all the way here in Baba Madlikin where it's just brought in Agav, and there is no Mishnah here about Hanukkah. Only Mishnah here is B'mei Madlikin, B'mei Ein Madlikin, which is the halachas of Hilchos Shabbos. So Ner Chanukah have to do with Hilchos Shabbos as opposed to the Mishnah where it should be. The right place, as Rav Tzadok is for it to have been, was not in Baba Kama, not in Shabbos, but in Sefer, but in Masechta Menachos. That's where it should have been. But Dinei Hadlakas HaMenorah. We're celebrating and we're commemorating the lighting of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash, so that is dealt with in Masechta Menachos. So menorah is a menachos. So what's it doing in Hilchos Shabbos? So Neiros Chanukah is Zeicher L'Neiros Hamikdash. So it would have been a nice gemara, a nice sequence that there were the Neiros in the Beis Hamikdash, and then there's our commemoration of the Neiros in the Beis Hamikdash, which is the Chanukah Neiros. Ach Iker Hanes Haye b'Chanukah. So he says, let's understand that the main nest that took place on Chanukah, Mashenitzchu HaChashmonaim b'msei mispar, how the Chashmonaim were able to succeed with a very small amount of people, Es HaYevanim, that they were molech, they were reigning b'chol ha'olam, v'hayu amrav. So here's this world superpower that was taking over the whole world. This is in the post-Alexander the Great world of the Greeks, the Assyrian Greeks. All the Malchus that broke up after Alexander the Great into three parts. But the miracle of the Shemen meaning there were two aspects of Hanukkah. One of them, of course, was the wars and the absolute miracle of our military victory over the Greeks, which made no sense at all. And that was something that we did, and Hashem helped us. But then there was the union of the Neiros Chanukah, which is something, which is a celebration of something that Hashem did. Okay, we lit a candle, but we didn't lit an 8-day candle. We lit a 1-day candle. So it's something that Hashem did, and this is a miracle from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's a different aspect of Hanukkah. One is about what the Chashmonaim did militarily, and the other is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did spiritually. He put this fire here. Yisrael mitzidam, as far as Klal Yisrael is concerned, kimin shetimu kol hashmonim, it was all over. There was no more oil to light. They were all tamei. V'lo haya lahem shemen, they had no oil. Hayu p'turim mitzvos hadlakas hamenorah. Okay, you can't do it. Do we light the menorah today at the Beis Hamikdash? Can't do it. Can't do it. That's all. Oinus rachman apatri. Oinus rachman apatri. We don't find that if you're ba'ones, this is an important halachic consideration. If I am pater, if I can't do it, I'm pater. If I'm pater from a mitzvah, where do we find that you should put your life in sakana to do the mitzvah? Yeah, it could be it was a Shas Hashmat. Shas Hashmat, it's mutter, but the whole principle of it is unusual halachically, that we should create a war, or we should be moser nefesh for Neiros Chanukah, for Neiros. So so if it's asur, from our point of view, no Neiros is no Neiros. Rak shehera Hashem yisparach oz. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu came into the picture here after all the wars and after all the military victories. Hera Hashem Yisparach Oz Shechaviva Hadlakas HaMenorah Lefanav. He says, I like that menorah. I want that menorah to be lit. V'himsi lifneihem b'nes shemen l'adlakas haneros. So Hashem threw in an extra nest of a pach shemen. There was a nest that they found even a pach shemen. That was one nest. And then another nest that had lit for 8 days. So they took over the base of it. This was pictured nearby. We got back into Yerushalayim after we were thrown out of the Beis Hamikdash. We came back into the Beis Hamikdash. It was destroyed. It looked like that there was a war, because there was a war. Things were all over the place. And of course the menorah wasn't lit. And we started rumbling through all of the different things that were in the Beis Hamikdash, and finally we found and everything was touched and tampered with by the Greeks. So that didn't feel like a Beis HaMikdash, and finally found something preserved. What? Yeah. They found the Pach Shemen, b'choy samay shel Kodesh Baruch Hu Nes. They lit it, and it lasted for 8 days. Second Nes. Both of these Nisim were the Pach Shem was planted by a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and certainly the light kept on going from a Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Could one say it's
What?
Well, why is there mesorah nefesh and this is over? The war was over. Why is lighting the menorah?
Why does he call it mesorah nefesh? I'm wondering the same thing, but I believe that one of the rules, they were still under Greek at this point. First of all, we don't know that the war was completely over. There was an absolute isser to do, and this branch of the Greeks an absolute isser to do avodah in the Beis HaMikdash.
Could one say that
also, they had to travel outside of Yerushalayim where they hadn't yet. It was still Greek occupation to try to get this. So they were traveling the back roads of Eretz Yisrael to try to get this oil. So the whole thing was like maybe just like you wouldn't want your kids to do this. Right? Just leave it alone.
Could be a situation of Mida connected Mida, because the Kohanim were so machbid to do everything proper. They wanted to be tahor, and they were all tummy met, and it would take 8 days to go through the whole process with the paraduma and what have you, so they would be tahor again to do it. And so you had the nes, Hashem gave them the nes of the oil lasting for the 8 days until they could make everything tahor again.
Okay. Good theory. Hara Hashem Yisbarach shechaviva hadlakas hamenorah lefanav v'himsi lifneihem b'nes shemen la'adlakas haneres. The Indian hadlakas hamenorah, says Reb Tzadok, and the idea of lighting the menorah, humasha amar ba v'har li k'maisha ha'arti lachem. I want you to light for me just like I'm lighting for you. Here, let me put this in Kabbalistic terminology to make it easier for us. That there is, as everybody knows, isarusa de le'ela and isarusa de l'sata. There is that which comes from Shemayim, and there is that which comes from Aretz. And they're both important. One is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Simply, we've been learning this since the beginning of Kedusha Shabbos. There's HaKadosh Baruch Hu creating the world, and then there's what we do with the creation. So it's coming. It's as I keep on explaining. It's a cycle. So the cycle is it starts from Hashem. Hashem creates the material of the world. Adam takes the material of the world and turns it into something kadosh. The ner that we're talking about over here is something which came from Hashem, isarusa de le'ela. Isarusa de le'ela that came here. The war was a war that we did. Of course it was miraculous, but it was a different type of a miracle. It was an isarusa de l'sata miracle. It was a miracle where we went to war, like we saw with our own eyes, the 6-day war. We have a koach, which doesn't make any sense, al pi teva. I think we even saw it a few weeks ago here. Doesn't make any sense, al pi teva. Yet, with our isarusa de l'sata, if we put enough kedusha into it, enough tefillos into it, and enough seichel into it, so somehow it works. It's not something which anybody can explain. In fact, if you look at the press, it's like complete denial, of the fact that thousands of rockets come down on cities and minimal casualties. We have a complaint that somebody got killed. If this would have happened in London or in Berlin or in Belgium or in New York, it would have been thousands of missiles. Imagine coming down on New York, so what would have been? So it's miracles and miracles. Those miracles, the reason it can be denied, sort of, or ignored is because it's isarusa de l'sata. Here, this miracle of the shemen was a different type of a miracle. It wasn't us taking this what Hashem gave us and bringing it up to Hashem. This was directly the Hanukkah candles was directly a nes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu into our world, right? So this was isarusa de le'ela. So it was a completely different type of a nes. The al hanisim, al voris, al the so we said this morning that was all about nisim that Hashem did, that we did with siyata d'shmaya. And then even the last part, v'adliku neiros b'chatzos kachecha, something that we did. But the nes of the Pach HaShemen, which is not mentioned there, not mentioned in the Mishnah, interesting, it's interesting that it's not mentioned anywhere, is something which HaKadosh Baruch Hu did l'gamri. And what does it mean? I give you something. Whenever Hashem gives us something, Inyan hadlakas hamenorah masha amar ba v'hoyer li k'maisha arti lachem. I gave you light. Now you give me light back. Like every isarusa de la'ela, isarusa de la'ela is HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us something. Now we have to give something back. That's the way the cycle of the world works. That's the way the creation works. Hoyerli k'maisha ha'arti lachem. You give me light, just like I'll give you light. So what does he want from us? What does he want from us? K'masha amar b'medrash rabbah. Tzaddik, I'll show you a medrash in Parashas Ba'aloischa. V'hainu or, what's the medrash? We're going to say it in a second. Hainu or Torah shebal peh shenimsa Yisrael v'loi b'shamayim here. Right? Like grasp this. That there's two parts of Torah. Part of Torah that came on Har Sinai, Torah shebiksav. This is complete isarusa delayla. But then there's Torah shebal peh. So this also came from Sinai. Did it? Also came from Sinai. So what's the difference between Torah shebal peh and Torah shebiksav? The difference is that Torah shebal peh requires the human processing system. Of course it came as a mesorah. But why is there machlokas? Why is there a whole shas? Why is there chidushay Torah? Why are there sfarim? And the reason is because the Torah shebal peh is already Hashem giving us something with which we can work with and bring it up. So Hashem says like this: I gave you light, give me back some light. The light that Hashem gave us, Torah shebiksav. The light that we're giving back is the development of it further and further and further in every generation. See, just while I'm here, this is on my mind because I had this argument yesterday. There is a shlita, if you will, an educational system or a derech limud, which says that one should not attribute any historical context to anything that we're learning. Meaning, if somebody tries to examine the nefesh HaChaim according to the way that the time that he lived and the place that he lived, so it's inaccurate. And the reason it's inaccurate, the argument goes, is because Torah came in Hashemayim, and if Torah came in Hashemayim, there's a Kabbalah of Torah that goes from generation to generation. So it has nothing to do with the place or the time that he lived in. We also have like an allergy to it because that's what the conservative Jews do. They love to analyze things according to history. I've read a lot of it. I don't think they do that good of a job usually. Personally, they don't. But be karod, if I'm allowed, I completely don't buy into the shita that you're not allowed to analyze something according to historic context or geographical context. I'll tell you why. Because not because you can understand what they meant by this word in the 16th century. I don't mean that type of scholarship. Although that's also true. You see, Rashi uses the Old French, and not only does he use Old French, but he says that he understood part of the Big Day Kahuna when he saw the way some of the military in his time dressed. There is something to the historic context also of how they're being mefarish, but it's much deeper than that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah, that's Isarusa de La'ela. It becomes according to the time, and according to the generations, and according to the needs of the time, according to the geographical needs, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts a wisdom in the mind of the Gedolim and the Talmidei Chachamim and the Tzaddikim that lived in that generation to understand and to unpackage the Torah for his or her generation. So it's a davar pashut that what's going to be mischadesh, let's say, in the year 3000 is different than what's needed in the year 2000. There is a certain, by the way, the Rosh says this before. The Rosh says this in his Akdama to Pirkei Avos. He says before that the Torah shebal peh is such that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it at Sinai, and then as it's needed, it's interpreted by the sages of every generation and unpackaged for that generation. So what happens is, there are chidushim, let's say, very, very important insights into mamish Gemara and Mishnah that, let's say, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zecher Tzadik L'Bracha, or Rav Soloveitchik, or the Brisker Rav, or whoever you want, were able to interpret that Rashi didn't interpret. So you could say, if you want to, you can say, well, obviously Rashi knew this Brisker Rav, or he knew this Tshuva and Rav Moshe. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know if he, probably he didn't, because it wasn't nogayah until he got to America in 1945, and all of a sudden the questions of mechitzas came up, or this came up. You know, people always ask this question, like, why doesn't the Gemara speak about this? Why is it declared in the Gemara? Unfortunately, not only good things, bad things also. The Gemara doesn't give us clarity in what to do with child abusers. Why? It wasn't their subject. It wasn't what was going on at that time. So now, you know, if you're a contemporary rabbi, all of a sudden you've got to interpret or return. So this is our job. Bein l'tov, bein l'ra. There's no halachas of modern day Eretz Yisrael because the time didn't come yet. Baruch Hashem, the last 40 years, last 50 years, been a renaissance of Svarim and halachas of Hilchos Shvius and Hilchos Shvita, the whole machods that deal with it. But when we came here, we were bankrupt. It required this generation to unfold it. So it's hard for me to buy into the idea that if we're going to look at when a concept, a Torah concept, was nischadesh in the world, that we're going to say, well, it's the same. Has nothing to do with the history of the time. It has everything to do with the history of the time. It was the history of the time which created the sarusa de l'sata. So this is exactly what we're learning here. That it's important to understand. If you like Hasidus, it's very clear that the Baal Shem Tov came exactly when he needed to come. It was a post Shapsai Tzvi era. He said himself. He said himself. This is his avodah. He even told stories about Shapsai Tzvi coming to him in a dream. He was clearly coming to deal with that situation in a whole different way than Torah was dealt with in Vilna. Everything, the Volozhin Yeshiva came when it had to come. The Alter of Slobodka came when he had to come, or Moshe Feinstein came when he had to come. And you can't come here when you have to come. Everything is exactly at the right time. And now we're doing things that it's never been a kasha to me. People say, well, why are you changing the tradition? Of course you have to be careful with this. It's a slippery slope. But why are you changing the tradition? Why are you doing something? Why do weddings look now different than they looked in Europe? Because we're different than they looked in Europe. The needs of each generation are different. The music sounds different. Everything sounds different. So tradition has its place, clearly. There's no question that there's a mesorah, but things have to be reinterpreted. And that's what Torah is. Torah Shebiksav, rather, is unchangeable. It's solid. Torah Shebal Peh is also unchangeable. The Yesodis that are there are unchangeable. But it's clearly interpreted lahalacha by every single sefer that you're looking at the shelves. It's clearly both the Noisei Kelim of the Chumash and the Noisei Kelim of the Rambam and the Noisei Kelim of the Shulchan Aruch. Everybody's bringing it down to us. That's what Yisarus and L'Sata is. So what you have here says the Lashon is Haidu Or Torah Shebal Peh is Sheharti Ha'er Li K'may Sheharti Lachem. I'm giving you the raw material. Give it back to me. But do some value added work on it. Add some value to the work. Put yourself into it. I would even go so far as that's what we're here for. That's just what we're allowed to do. That's goof of what we're here for. There has to be interpreters of the Torah in every generation to interpret it for the generation that they live in, without going away. This is the slippery slope. Without going away from the mesorah of the Yud Gimel Krei HaTorah of the mesorah. What has to be a bit mumcha to know what has to be reinterpreted or interpreted for the generation, and what you just leave alone because it's violating the mesorah of Klal Yisrael, certainly the halacha of Klal Yisrael. Not a regalachas, but it's a whole mesorah. Pinchas, welcome back.
So the generation you're implementing is the future generations because they piggyback from it. So
they're creating more chomer to create chomer with.
So that's a very scary.
Of course it's scary, but you know what? Because we're scared, we shouldn't not do our job. I must.
Face your fear.
Tein l'chacham, v'yichachem oid. That's what it says, right? Tein l'chacham, v'yichachem oid. We have to do something with the chachma that's given to us. And I always say this verse that Avraham Avinu came to MalkiTzedek. Melech Shalem, and MalkiTzedek took out bread and he took out wine. So I always say this, like they had a meeting. Avraham Avinu, after he won a war, he won a world war over four Malachim, he pulled out this whole superpowers, Iraq, Iran, he pushed them all out of Eretz Yisrael, and he comes to MalkiTzedek Melech Shalem, v'hoitzi lo lechem v'yayin. The Medrash says that he went to MalkiTzedek that he wanted to get some tips on how to be mekarev the Canaanim, because MalkiTzedek was from Shem. May have been Shem, Rashi says, Shem ben Noach, and he was in a Canaanim Azvaris, everything was Canaanim over there. He wanted some, Avraham Avinu said, okay, I worked in Haran, I did my thing in Haran, how do I do it in Eretz Yisrael? So it says, V'hotzi lo lechem v'yayin, they broke bread, they drank wine, but I wish I was a fly on the wall to hear what they talked about, how do you deal with the Canaanim, right? We would have peace today if we knew how to deal with the Canaanim. So it's something Rabbi.
To break bread.
To break bread, drink wine. That's the answer. Make chalot.
A lot of them cute today.
But the Muslims don't drink wine.
I don't know if they're Canaanim. Rabbi Nachman the Breslover says that if you look at lechem and you look at yayin, you see two opposite chunos. Lechem is good when it's fresh out of the oven. Maybe a couple of hours, maybe a day after that. You can't eat it 3 days, it's gone. Wine, when it's fresh, has no time. The older it gets, the better it gets. Rabbi Nachman, the lechem and yayin are two opposite things. So Rabbi Nachman says that MalkiTzedek taught Avraham Avinu this lesson: when you're presenting Hashem to the people of Canaan, this is what you have to do. You have to give them some lechem and you have to give them some yayin. You have to give them some yayin, like the old-time religion. You have to give them the mesorah of Klal Yisrael. You have to tell them that this is what happened from Adam Arishon until now, and you have to explain to them about the Shechina, and you have to explain this. It's yesodistic. You have to give them yayin. There's nothing like wine. But just make sure you give them a little bit of lechem also. Lechem is something fresh, something new, something which is particularly nogayah them. Particularly, but it's the secret of the bread and the wine, the secret of Kira. Not just chalot. Lechem v'yayin, two opposite things that come together. The yayin efshar loimer, the yayin amoisef ad Rabbi Nachman. The yayin is clearly the sarusa de la'ela, and the lechem is clearly the sarusa de l'sata. It doesn't last long. The bread doesn't last long because what we are interpreting today in 2012 might not be the right interpretation for 2023. Even Gedolim. I had a Maisa where when I was a bacher, I had received a number of Sfarim from there were old Sfarim that I got from somewhere, and they were like drasha Sfarim from pre-war Europe. And it was interesting to me. They were not anybody heard of. And I just got into my hand a bunch of these Sfarim, and I'm sitting on a bus, and I was looking at one of these drushas that were said in pre-war Europe, maybe it was in 1870 or 1860, a drusha about a Rav, a big batif, his community was giving the Musar. So there's an old Yerushalmi guy, since at that time, 30 years ago, he was probably about 90. So I doubt if he's with us any longer, but I have no idea who he was. Maybe he was Elio or nothing. So he sits down next to me, and he says to me, "What are you reading?" So I showed him the Sefer, old Sefer, very interesting. He looks at it, this, the name, this, that Rav, this Rav, and he knew exactly what. So he says to me, I never heard anything like this before. He says to me, the Sefer is just history. It has no value today at all. There's no value today at all. How can you talk like that about a Sefer? It was a pellet to me. I never heard anybody talk like that about a Sefer before. So he said, look, he gave drushes to the people that he had to give drushes to in the Carpathians. Do you live in the Carpathians? He says to me, do you live in the Carpathians? He says, well, everything he's saying is a Torah Shebal Peh, which was exactly the right thing to say to Peh. It has historical value only. It shook me up. You see, I'm in post-trauma. Here we are. Decades later, it's still like this conversation shook me up. But the evidence is that he's right. I mean, there are svarim that were classics that went through all the generations, and the Mesilas Yesharim could have been written yesterday. It was that type of Ruach HaKodesh, and there's svarim that were interpretations for the generation. I think that they always talk about the fact that the Malbim, how do we know the Malbim? What he wrote on Tanakh. The Malbim, what he wrote on Tanakh was a fraction of what he wrote on Shulchan Aruch. On Tanakh it looks like this, on Shulchan Aruch it looks like this. We have left, because of the Gilgulim of the war, we have left the Artzis HaChaim on Hilchos Tzitzis, which is maybe 15 pages. That's what we have from the Artzis. We don't even have it anymore. It is hard to read, and it's been printed for some reason. Nobody's ever reprinted it. But the Malbim Be'ikr was a posek. It was a huge posek, and it was a huge Talmud Chacham and a gadol. That was what the Malbim was. He wrote in his spare time a sefer on Tanakh because he was dealing with the maskilim who were abusing the psukim of Tanakh. So he wrote a pshat in Tanakh. Today that's all we have. You know why that's all we have? I heard from my Rabbi Yaacov because that's all we need from him. His tachlis in this world was to teach us how to read Tanakh. But maybe himself didn't realize it. You find this with so many gedolim over all the generations. The contribution that they have to make was one for its time, and another which was an eternal contribution that we need, or we need for a few generations. So that all of that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm giving you light. We have to continue the concept, but I'm giving you light. Now do something with the light. But that light reflects as reflection goes, as the halachas of reflection goes. It reflects differently based on what it's reflecting on. And it's reflecting on a generation which is a different generation. The door of the Chashmonaim was different than the door of the Hadlakas HaNeiros in the Beis HaMikdash when it was in a different matzav. They were lighting, according to many opinions, on wooden menorahs by the Chashmonaim. Wooden menorahs. It wasn't even the same menorah. So, I'm sorry.
Could we understand also that the Rabbanim and the leaders of the generations interpreted based on their personal experiences, not only geographic and
Isn't it pashut from the Gemara like that Reish Lakish was paskening based on Rabbi Yochanan? We take it as a shef. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, the reason you know that is because he used to be a ganav. That's how you know the halachas of knives. This knife was like that knife was like that. But Rabbi Yochanan said that. Rabbi Yochanan said that to him at the very beginning. He said, "Chel chol la'iraisa." Your experience, everything that you have, your koach, everything, use it for Torah. So it was definitely his personal piece. But you find it almost with every one of the Tanoim. So my point is that I wrote a sefer on Pirkei Avos where I'm mefarish Pirkei Avos based on the what was going on in their lives, based on their halachas, based on the challenges of the Tanoim. And I make sure that certain people don't see that sefer because otherwise I'll be completely mekarev. But the fact of the matter is, I think I'm right. That of course Hillel had an insight that nobody before him had because Hillel lived when Hillel lived. Pasha.
Who is it that held not like that? You said you didn't mention any names.
Well, somebody was quoting last night Rav Leichter, who was saying but we heard the shita that it was holding a shita that the whole thing is erroneous to bring any historical context into. So that was my argument yesterday. But I'm sure it's a shita. I'm sure it's a big shita that.
That's still pure.
Yeah. Okay, we'll finish.